He didn't feel like a billionaire. He didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like the boy from the foster home who had finally found his way back to the right side of the door. But the struggle was far from over. The board was meeting that evening to finalize his ousting, and the legal battle for Eleanor's future was about to become a media circus that threatened to pull Arthur back into the depths. He had paid the debt, but he hadn't yet faced the consequences of the truth he had unleashed. Arthur sat in the dimly lit boardroom, the air thick with the scent of expensive coffee and betrayal. The 12 members of the board stared at him with expressions ranging from cold fury to calculated indifference. Bradley, the COO, stood at the head of the table, tapping a gold pen against a leather-bound folder. "The numbers are in, Arthur," Bradley said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Vance International stock has dropped 40% in 5 days. Our partners are pulling out of the merger. They don't want to be associated with a criminal family. You didn't just report a crime, you nuked the company." Arthur leaned back, his eyes scanning the faces of men he had enriched over the last decade. "I didn't nuke the company, Bradley. My wife stole from it, and you all stood by while it happened. Not one of you questioned why the foundation's overhead had tripled. Not one of you wondered why payroll was being delayed in the valley. We trusted you to manage your own house," a board member shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You've made us all look like fools or accomplices. We're voting to terminate your contract for cause and liquidate your remaining stock options to cover the brand damage you've caused." Arthur felt the walls closing in. This was the moment he had feared, the loss of the empire he had spent every waking hour building. But as he looked at the eviction notice he had kept in his pocket as a reminder, the fear evaporated. "Go ahead," Arthur said, his voice steady. "Take the stock. Take the title. But know this, I'm taking the foundation name with me. You can keep the skyscrapers and the logistics contracts, but the legacy belongs to the man who honors his word. And if you try to fight me on the restitution funds, I'll spend every last dime I have left making sure the public knows exactly which of you knew about Eleanor's discretionary accounts." The room went silent. The threat hung in the air like a live wire. Bradley finally looked away, unable to meet Arthur's gaze. "Get out, Arthur. Your security clearance is revoked. You have 1 hour to clear your desk." Arthur walked out of the corporate tower with nothing but a single cardboard box. It was raining, a cold, gray drizzle that felt honest compared to the sterile air of the boardroom. He didn't call a car. He walked 3 miles to a small, cramped office he had rented in the valley, right in the heart of the community Eleanor had plundered. Waiting for him, there were Marcus and Mr. Henderson. The estate manager looked different without his tuxedo. He wore a simple wool sweater and looked 10 years younger. "The board thinks they won," Marcus said, pointing to a series of monitors. "But while they were voting to fire you, I was finishing the deep dive audit. Arthur, it's worse than we thought. Eleanor wasn't just gambling, she was being blackmailed." Arthur stopped mid-stride. "Blackmailed by who?" "A shell company called Apex Holdings." Henderson chimed in, his voice trembling slightly. "I recognize the name from some old files. Arthur, Apex is a subsidiary of a firm owned by Bradley's brother-in-law. They weren't just letting her gamble, they were feeding the addiction, providing her with the credits, and then charging her 200% interest to keep it quiet. They were draining the foundation through her." The rage that washed over Arthur was different this time. It wasn't the hot, impulsive anger he'd felt toward Eleanor. It was a cold, surgical fury. "They used her," Arthur whispered. "They targeted her weakness to gut the company from the inside." "And they used your reputation as a shield," Marcus added, "because they knew you were too proud to ever look at the books too closely. They knew you'd just trust the people around you." Arthur sat down at the small metal desk. "We're not just fixing the books anymore, Marcus. We're going to war. But we do it my way. No backroom deals, no quiet settlements. I want every transaction, every blackmail email, and every connection to Bradley on a public server by morning. That will destroy the company entirely, Henderson warned. Thousands of innocent employees will lose their jobs if Vance International goes bankrupt. Arthur looked at a photo of the staff at the estate, people like Elena who had stayed loyal for years. The company is already dead, Henderson. It's a carcass being picked clean by vultures. I'm going to save the people, not the brand. Next few days were a blur of high-stakes legal chess. Arthur spent his nights in the Valley office and his days at the police station, providing evidence not just against Eleanor, but against the very men who had just fired him. The media, which had initially painted Arthur as a failed leader, began to shift the narrative. He was no longer the billionaire with the thief wife. He was becoming the whistleblower billionaire. But the cost was personal. He visited Eleanor in the detention center. She looked hollow, her skin sallow under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me they were hurting you?" Eleanor laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Tell you? You were busy being a saint, Arthur. You were busy being the voice of the people. I was just the trophy you left on the shelf. When I started losing, I was so ashamed. And they were so nice at first. They told me they'd help. Then the help turned into threats. They said they'd destroy your perfect reputation if I didn't keep the money flowing." "I would have protected you," Arthur said, reaching for her hand across the glass. "No, you wouldn't," she sobbed, pulling away. "You would have done exactly what you did. You would have chosen the truth over me. You always do." Arthur left the prison feeling like he'd been hollowed out. He realized that in his quest to be a man of integrity to the world, he had been a man of absence to his own family. He had been so focused on the legacy that he hadn't noticed the rot in his own living room. If you're seeing the complexity of this story, how being right doesn't always mean being happy, then you're part of a community that understands the true price of justice. This story is reaching a point of no return. If you want to see how Arthur takes down the giants who betrayed him, hit that like button right now. Comment "Reckoning" if you think Bradley deserves to go down alongside Eleanor. And please subscribe to make sure you don't miss the final explosion of this narrative. As Arthur walked back to his small office in the valley, he noticed a group of people gathered outside. It was Elena, Mia, and about 30 other former staffers. He braced himself for a confrontation, but as he got closer, he saw they weren't holding protest signs. They were holding boxes of food and thermoses of coffee. "We heard you were working out of this place," Elena said, stepping forward. "And we heard what you're doing to the men who did this to us." "I don't have much left to give you right now, Elena," Arthur said, his voice tired. "You already gave us the truth," she replied, handing him a cup of coffee. "That's more than anyone in Sterling Heights ever gave us. We're not here for a check, Mr. Vance. We're here to help you move the boxes." Arthur looked at the small crowd of people, the people he had once looked past, the people who were now the only ones standing by him. He realized that his wealth hadn't been in his bank account. It had been in the hands of the people who worked for him. He took a sip of the coffee, the warmth spreading through his chest. The reckoning was coming, and for the first time, Arthur Vance didn't feel like he was fighting for a company. He was fighting for a family. Arthur stood in the center of the cramped Valley office, surrounded by stacks of paper and the low hum of ancient computers. The air was thick with the smell of cheap coffee and the electric tension of a looming storm. Marcus slammed his hand onto a desk, his eyes wide as he stared at the screen. "We got it, Arthur. The digital trail is complete. Bradley didn't just know about the Apex Holdings blackmail. He was the one who authorized the legal fees that covered the transfers. He was literally paying his brother-in-law to rob his own company while using Eleanor as the middleman. Arthur didn't smile. He felt a cold, clinical detachment. Send it. Send it to the SEC, the DA, and every major news outlet in the country. And Marcus, post the raw data on the Foundation's public server. Let the world see every cent, every lie, and every bribe. Within minutes, the digital world exploded. Arthur watched the live stock ticker for Vance International on his laptop. The line didn't just dip, it plummeted vertically, a red streak of failure. The board was in a panic. His phone began to vibrate incessantly on the desk. Bradley was calling. Arthur let it ring until it timed out, then picked it up when it rang again. "You've killed it, Arthur. You've killed everything," Bradley screamed, his voice high and ragged. "The feds are in the lobby. Do you have any idea what you've done? Thousands of people are going to lose their pensions. The Vance name is radioactive." The Vance name was radioactive the moment you targeted a woman with an addiction to line your pockets, Bradley, Arthur said, his voice as sharp as a razor. "I told you I was going to save the people, not the brand. I've already set up an independent trust using my liquidated personal assets to guarantee the pensions of the rank-and-file employees. You and the board, you're on your own. I'll see you in court." He ended the call and tossed the phone into the trash. The next morning, the headlines were a battlefield. Vance CEO ousted in largest corporate ethics scandal of the decade. Billionaire turns whistleblower on own family and firm. Arthur didn't read the articles. He was at the courthouse, but not for a corporate hearing. He was there for the final sentencing of Eleanor Vance. The atmosphere was heavy. Eleanor looked smaller than she had a week ago, her spirit seemingly evaporated. When the judge asked if she had any final words, she looked at Arthur. "I thought money was a shield," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought if we had enough of it, the rules didn't apply. I was wrong. I'm sorry, Arthur. I'm sorry to the people I hurt." The judge was stern but fair. "Given your cooperation in the investigation against Bradley and Apex Holdings, and the fact that you were targeted by predatory actors, I am sentencing you to 5 years of probation, 10,000 hours of community service, and full financial restitution. You will not see a cell, Mrs. Vance, but you will spend the next 5 years working for the very people you deprived." Eleanor collapsed into her chair, sobbing with a mixture of grief and relief. Arthur stood up and walked out of the courtroom. He had done what was right, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a funeral for a life he no longer recognized. As he walked down the courthouse steps, a familiar car pulled up. It was the old black sedan, but Henderson was driving it, not a professional chauffeur. "The board tried to seize the car, Arthur," Henderson said with a wink. "I told them the engine was dead and I was taking it to the scrapyard. I think we should go to the Foundation's main project site." They drove to a half-finished community center in the heart of the valley, the one Eleanor had skimmed funds from. A crowd had gathered. These were the families who had been promised a better future, only to have it stalled by greed. Arthur stepped out of the car, and the crowd went silent. He walked to the center of the construction site, where a group of contractors stood with their arms crossed, looking at him with suspicion. "I know the checks bounced last month," Arthur said, his voice carrying over the wind. "I know the Vance name is on the news for all the wrong reasons, but I didn't come here to give a speech. I came here to work." He reached into the back of the car and pulled out a heavy tool belt and a hard hat. He had spent his teenage years on construction sites before his first big break. The weight felt familiar, grounding. "What are you doing, Vance?" one of the contractors asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "You haven't held a hammer in 20 years. "Then I'm about 20 years behind on my quota," Arthur replied. He walked over to a stack of lumber and began to lift. One by one, the other workers started to join in. The silence was replaced by the rhythmic sound of hammers and the roar of engines. If you are witnessing the absolute collapse of a titan and his struggle to rebuild from the dirt up, you know that this is more than just a story. It's a lesson in what happens when a leader stops leading and starts serving. We are nearing the final chapter of Arthur's redemption. If you believe that work is the only way to heal a broken reputation, hit that like button right now. Comment "Rebuild" to show your support for Arthur's new mission. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you're going to miss the most intense conclusion we've ever produced on this channel. By the end of the day, Arthur's hands were blistered, and his back was screaming in pain, but his mind was quiet. He sat on a pile of bricks, watching the sun set over the valley. Elena approached him, bringing a bottle of water. "Mia wants to know if you're coming to her school play next week," she said softly. "She says you're the only important person she knows who actually listens." Arthur took a sip of the water, feeling the grit of the day on his skin. "Tell her I wouldn't miss it for the world, Elena, and tell her I'm not an important person. I'm just a man who's finally learning how to keep a promise." But as the night fell, Marcus arrived at the site, his face pale in the moonlight. "Arthur, we have a problem. Bradley isn't going down quietly. He's filed a massive countersuit, claiming you manufactured the evidence to cover your own tracks. And he's leaked a series of private emails between you and Eleanor from years ago. They're being taken out of context to make it look like you were the mastermind behind the whole thing. The media is turning again. They're calling it the Vance double-cross." Arthur looked at his calloused hands. The battle for the truth had just entered its most dangerous phase. He wasn't just fighting for the people anymore. He was fighting to keep his own soul from being buried under a mountain of corporate lies. The news cycle was a whirlpool of fire. Everywhere Arthur looked, his own face stared back at him under headlines that screamed "Mastermind" and "The Vance Hoax." The leaked emails were a masterclass in manipulation. Bradley's team had taken fragmented sentences from decade-old private conversations and stitched them into a narrative that made Arthur look like the architect of the very fraud he had exposed. He sat in the small valley office, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. Marcus was pacing, his hair disheveled. "They're winning, Arthur. The public loves a hero, but they love a fallen idol even more. The DA is under pressure to reopen the investigation into you." Arthur looked at the blistered skin on his palms. The physical pain was a grounding wire. "Let them look," he said, his voice a low, steady hum. "Bradley thinks he's playing a game of optics. He thinks if he can smudge my name, the evidence against him disappears. But he's forgotten one thing. I'm not a billionaire anymore. I have nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous person in the room." The Vance double-cross narrative peaked on a Tuesday morning. Arthur received a summons for a public hearing before a special ethics committee. It was a trap designed to be a televised execution of his character. Bradley was already there when Arthur arrived, looking polished in a $3,000 suit, flanked by a phalanx of lawyers. He smirked at Arthur, a predatory glint in his eyes. "You should have taken the quiet exit, Arthur," Bradley whispered as they passed in the hallway. "Now you're going to watch your name get erased from history." The hearing room was packed with reporters, their cameras aimed like cannons. The lead committee member, a stern woman named Senator Hayes, began the interrogation. "Mr. Vance, these emails suggest you were aware of the Apex transfers as early as 5 years ago. They suggest you used your wife's gambling addiction as a convenient smokescreen to exit the company with a clean image while leaving your board to take the fall. How do you respond?" Arthur stood up. He didn't look at the senator. He looked directly into the primary camera lens. "I respond with the only thing I have left. the absolute unvarnished truth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, battered digital recorder. "Bradley, you told me I should have taken the quiet exit. You told me the feds were in the lobby and that I had killed everything. But you forgot that I've been wearing a wire since the moment I walked into that boardroom last week." The room went silent. You could hear the heartbeat of the crowd. Arthur pressed play. Bradley's voice filled the chamber, loud and clear, his confession of targeting Eleanor, his admission that the board stood by while the foundation was gutted, and his threat to liquidate Arthur for reporting the truth. It was the smoking gun that no spin doctor could fix. "The emails you see are fakes, Senator," Arthur said, his voice ringing with the authority of a man who had walked through fire. "But the voice you just heard is real. I didn't report this to save my image. I reported it because I am a man of my word, and my word was that the people of the valley would be protected. If that makes me a villain in your corporate story, so be it. But the ledgers don't lie, and neither do the people I've spent the last week working beside." The fallout was instantaneous. Bradley was arrested before he could even reach the elevators. The board was dissolved by the end of the day. But for Arthur, there was no celebration. He walked out of the building and hailed a bus. Not a taxi, not a sedan. He rode it all the way to the end of the line, to the unfinished community center. He found Eleanor there, painting the walls of what would become the new youth library. She looked at him, her eyes bright with tears. "You did it, Arthur. It's all over the news. They're calling you the conscience of the city." "I don't want to be a conscience, Eleanor," Arthur said, picking up a brush. "I just want to finish this wall." Over the next year, the Vance Legacy Foundation was reborn, but not in a skyscraper. It operated out of a refurbished warehouse in the valley. Eleanor served her community service there, teaching financial literacy to young women, her face devoid of the old vanity but filled with a new, quiet purpose. She and Arthur stayed. Separated, but they spoke every week, an honest, painful dialogue about the life they had lost and the souls they were trying to save. Arthur lived in a small apartment above a local grocery store. His days were spent overseeing the construction of low-income housing, and his evenings were spent in the Valley Library, tutoring kids like Mia. He was no longer the man in the charcoal suit. He was the man in the flannel shirt, his hands permanently stained with the work of restoration. On the day the community center finally opened, the city wanted to throw a parade. Arthur refused. Instead, he invited every single person who had been affected by the misappropriation to a simple barbecue on the front lawn. He stood on a small wooden crate, looking out at the hundreds of faces, the people who had once been invisible to him, who were now his entire world. "Success is a dangerous word," Arthur told the crowd. "For a long time, I thought it meant the height of my bank account. I thought it meant the power I held over others. But looking at all of you today, I realize that success is much simpler. It's the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and know that your word is a bond that cannot be broken by greed or fear. It's the knowledge that when someone is falling, you are the floor beneath them, not the boot on their neck." Mia ran up to him, hugging his waist. She was taller now, her sweater new and warm. "Are you still a billionaire, Mr. Arthur?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Arthur laughed, a genuine, deep sound that he hadn't felt in years. He looked around at the community he had helped rebuild, at the staff who were now paid fairly, and at the wife who was finally finding her way back from the dark. He felt a profound sense of peace that no amount of stock options could ever buy. "No, Mia," Arthur said, ruffling her hair. "I'm much wealthier than that." The story of Arthur Vance is a reminder that integrity isn't a destination. It's a daily choice. It's the courage to burn down a lie to save a single truth. If you've stayed with us through this journey of betrayal and redemption, you are the reason we tell these stories. You've seen the rise, the fall, and the slow, honest climb back up. If this story moved you, If it made you rethink what success really looks like, please hit that like button one last time. Comment legacy below to show that you value the man over the money. Subscribe to join a community that believes in the power of the truth. Thank you for watching, and remember, your word is the only thing you truly own. Protect it at all costs.